Racism rarely announces itself, but in the polished quiet of a luxury dealership, it made itself known in silence. What began as a proud moment between a black father and his son quickly turned into a quiet humiliation, dismissed, ignored, then escorted out without cause. The salesman never asked who they were, never imagined the man he disrespected controlled the very supply chain that kept his showroom alive. By the time he realized the truth, it was too late. Because Malcolm Rhodes didn't raise his voice, he raised a standard and built something no one could take from him again. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The sun filtered through the wide glass of the dealership's front facade, casting sleek reflections across a row of pristine vehicles lined like polished trophies on a marble floor. Chrome glinted under recessed lights. Engines gleamed behind sculpted grills. Everything in the place radiated wealth, precision, and the kind of luxury that turned heads and unlocked silent admiration. But none of it held a candle to the quiet glow on Malcolm Rhodes's face as he glanced at the young man beside him. Jordan's sneakers barely squeaked on the polished tile as he took a few cautious steps inside, eyes wide but posture steady. He didn't smile. Not yet. He was trying to play it cool. 6 feet tall now, lean and growing into his frame, Jordan had that still awkward confidence of a boy, just beginning to recognize the man he was becoming. His hands were tucked in the pockets of his jacket, but his eyes were doing a full scan. Hood lifted slightly as he took it all in. Malcolm watched him with a calm kind of pride that rested deeper than words. "You see that Aston Martin over there?" he asked gently. Jordan tilted his head, lips parting slightly. "That's the Vantage, right?" "That's right." Malcolm nodded, one hand resting lightly on Jordan's back as they began walking. "I remember when I was your age. I used to drive by this place every weekend just to catch a glimpse. Back then, the windows were darker. You couldn't see inside unless someone opened the door, but I used to dream about it anyway." Jordan gave a small, knowing smile. "And now you could buy the whole building if you wanted." Malcolm chuckled under his breath, the sound low and steady. "That's not the point." Jordan looked over. "Then what is?" "The point is, I get to bring you in here, with your head held high. On your terms. You earned this, son." Jordan's eyes dropped to the floor for a second, humbled by the weight of that truth. His voice was quiet. "It's just honor roll, Dad." Malcolm stopped walking, gently took Jordan's chin and lifted it. "No, it's not. It's late nights, early mornings, self-discipline, doing what's right even when it's not easy. It's who you're becoming. This," he gestured around them, "this is just a symbol, a way for me to say, I see you. I'm proud of you, and I want the world to see what happens when we invest in our sons." Jordan's throat tightened. He blinked fast, nodded once, then stepped forward to mask the emotion. "Well, I mean, if you insist on getting me a car." Malcolm laughed and followed, his steps relaxed, his shoulders loose. "I do. But it has to be something you want, something that reflects you. So take your time. This is your moment." They weaved between the rows of sports sedans and SUVs, the hush of the dealership giving the space a strange sense of reverence, like walking through a gallery where every piece was built to move. The smell of new leather and faint cologne hung in the air. Jordan paused by a matte black coupe, his hand hovering near the side mirror, but not touching. From across the showroom, a salesman in a tailored navy blazer watched them. White, mid-30s, with perfect teeth and a tight-lipped smile that rarely reached his eyes. He didn't move, just leaned slightly against a nearby desk, as he tapped once on his tablet and glanced behind him, where a white couple had just stepped through the door. Malcolm noted it, then turned his attention back to his son. "This one's got some presence," Jordan said finally. "It does," Malcolm agreed. "You can take it for a test drive, see how it handles." "Seriously? You think I brought you here to window shop?" Jordan's grin broke through. "Okay, now I'm starting to believe this is real." Malcolm smiled wider, folding his arms and enjoying the view. His son, the possibilities, this moment. He didn't come here to prove anything to anyone. Not the salesman, not the customers. This wasn't about appearances. It was about his son. About that subtle, powerful thing every good father tries to give his child. The feeling of being seen, respected, and celebrated for who they are, not who the world assumes them to be. They turned toward the main desk, unaware that the moment they'd waited years for was about to unravel, not because of money or status or timing, but because someone decided they didn't belong. They moved slowly, side by side, taking in the angles and curves of the luxury machines like they were appreciating artwork in motion. The dealership remained quiet. No greetings, no water offered, no questions asked. The salesman who had watched them from across the room still hadn't moved. He lingered near a glass desk, eyes now locked on a couple that had just entered. A man in a golfing pullover and a woman in oversized sunglasses, their laughter light and aimless. Without hesitation, the salesman peeled away from his post and crossed the floor toward them with effortless charm, his voice smooth and enthusiastic as he approached the white couple. "Good morning, folks. First time visiting us?" he asked, tone high and warm. Malcolm turned slightly, catching the shift. His gaze followed the salesman's path, then dropped back to Jordan, who stood admiring a sleek convertible with glistening silver rims. The contrast in treatment was clear. Malcolm didn't say anything just yet. He believed in patience. He believed in giving people space to show who they were. But Jordan glanced over too. "They just walked in," he said quietly. Malcolm gave a subtle nod. "I know." They lingered near a graphite SUV now, the kind that looked like it could power through storms without losing signal or speed. A minute passed, then another. Still, no one came. The showroom echoed slightly with the salesman's eager voice from across the floor. "We just got this one in from Stuttgart. Rare trim, limited run. Let me grab the keys, and we can start the paperwork." Jordan leaned toward his father, tone hushed. "Should we say something?" "Soon," Malcolm replied. Sometimes the most telling thing is what isn't said. The unspoken tension began to fold itself around the room like static. Malcolm and Jordan weren't dressed in suits, but neither looked out of place. Malcolm wore dark jeans, a wool jacket, and clean leather boots. Jordan had on his favorite hoodie and a well-kept pair of Jordans. They looked like what they were, a father and son out shopping. They just didn't look like what the salesman expected buyers to look like. Finally, Malcolm stepped away from the vehicle and approached the desk. The salesman saw him coming and gave a half-second pause, an almost imperceptible flicker of annoyance, but forced a smile as he turned. "Hi there," Malcolm said, polite but firm. "My son and I have been browsing for a few minutes. We'd like some assistance." The salesman, Greg, according to the name tag half hidden beneath his lapel, nodded briskly but didn't offer a hand. "Right. Well, it's a busy morning. We're short-staffed." Malcolm glanced around. The room was quiet. Two other employees chatted behind a partitioned glass office, coffee cups in hand. "Seems manageable." Greg gave a clipped laugh, like he didn't appreciate being challenged. "We have appointments we need to prioritize. Are you looking for something specific? Or just having a look?" "We're looking to buy," Malcolm said. Today, Jordan came up beside him, hands still in his pockets, watching the interaction closely. Greg's smile didn't quite falter, but it stiffened. "Okay, do you have a particular budget in mind? Some of these vehicles start in the triple digits. Most customers like to do a bit of research first." Malcolm raised an eyebrow. "We have," Greg nodded slowly, eyes shifting between them. "Well, it's just, these are performance vehicles. They require a serious investment. Insurance, maintenance, packages. A lot of folks don't realize that when they stop by for a peek." "Is that what you think this is?" Malcolm asked, voice cool. Greg crossed his arms loosely, trying to keep the upper hand. "No offense, but we get a lot of traffic from people who like to browse. Not everyone who walks in is actually in the market." Jordan's face tensed. He looked at his dad, unsure if he should say something, but Malcolm gently held up a hand to signal calm. "I didn't ask what a lot of people do," Malcolm said. "I'm telling you what we came to do." Greg gave a tight shrug. "I'm just being honest. You're welcome to look around, but if you're not ready to make a purchase today, I don't want to waste anyone's time. Ours or yours?" Jordan stepped forward. "So, you'll help other people, but not us?" Greg looked at him like he was a problem, not a customer. "Young man, no need to get emotional. I said you're welcome to browse." That was when the air shifted. Malcolm's eyes narrowed, his stance sharpening like a blade sliding free of its sheath. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You're standing in front of a young man who worked his heart out to earn this moment, and you've done everything but spit on it." Greg's nostrils flared slightly. "Sir, if you're going to be hostile, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "Hostile?" Malcolm repeated, incredulous. "Because I'm demanding the same courtesy you just gave that couple over there." More heads turned now. One of the other salespeople behind the glass office glanced up, but didn't come out. Customers nearby were beginning to sense the tension, but no one moved, no one intervened. Greg straightened, jaw set. "We reserve the right to refuse service if someone becomes disruptive." Jordan stepped back slightly, chest tight. He'd never seen his father like this, controlled, calm, but simmering with something deeper than anger. It wasn't rage. It was betrayal, disappointment. "We're not being disruptive," Malcolm said. "We're being visible. And apparently, that's your problem." Greg's jaw flexed as he adjusted the cuffs of his jacket, his voice now void of the polished salesman charm. "Look, I don't know what kind of show you're trying to put on here, but if you're looking to stir up some scene for attention—" "Attention?" Malcolm echoed, not raising his voice, just sharpening it. "The only thing we were trying to get was basic service." "The same thing you gave them," he said, gesturing toward the white couple now cautiously glancing over from the corner of the showroom. "We didn't ask for special treatment. Just honesty, respect, a conversation." Greg shifted his weight and laughed once, dry and dismissive. "Right. Well, you're clearly not here to buy anything. You've made that obvious." "I said we were," Malcolm replied firmly, his voice steady and calm. "But apparently, that wasn't enough for you." Greg's face hardened. "This isn't how people conduct themselves when they're serious. You're being aggressive." Malcolm didn't blink. "I haven't raised my voice. I haven't moved toward you. I haven't insulted you. You're uncomfortable because I won't let you walk away from this the way you usually do. You're twisting my words." "No," Malcolm said with a chill in his voice. "I'm holding you accountable for them." Greg's lips tightened, and for a split second, something behind his eyes shifted. Not fear, but defiance backed by unspoken confidence. Confidence that came from knowing the system always tilted his way. "You know what?" he snapped, pulling out his phone and turning slightly toward the front desk. "Let's make this easier for everyone." He raised his hand and pointed. "Call security." The receptionist hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keypad. "Now," Greg added, louder. She pressed a button without looking up. A silent alert. No words needed. Greg turned back to Malcolm and Jordan, his arms crossed and voice taut with smug finality. "We're done here." Malcolm stared at him in silence, eyes unreadable, face calm. But Jordan could feel the tension in his father's shoulders, tight as a pulled cord. The kind of restraint that takes decades to master. The kind you learn when the world tries to provoke you into making a mistake, so it can punish you for reacting. They stood there, unmoving, as the quiet in the dealership became suffocating. And then the security guard appeared. He was tall, stocky, and clearly unsure what exactly he was walking into. His uniform looked too tight at the collar, and the radio on his belt gave a faint static hiss as he stepped forward. "Is there a problem here?" Greg didn't hesitate. "Yes. They're causing a disturbance. I've asked them to leave, and they're refusing." Malcolm held up both hands in a slow, controlled gesture, palms open, fingers loose. "We haven't raised our voices. We haven't threatened anyone. We asked to speak to a salesperson. That's it." The guard looked between them, visibly uncomfortable. "Sir, I need to ask you to leave." "For what reason?" Malcolm asked, keeping his eyes steady. "We were told there's an issue," the guard said, avoiding Malcolm's gaze and shifting on his feet. Malcolm's voice cooled further, quiet but unyielding. "You were told there's an issue. But what do you see?" The guard hesitated. His eyes dropped for a moment, then flicked toward Greg, who stood tall with folded arms and a satisfied smirk barely hidden at the corners of his mouth. "You're asking a father and son, who did nothing but try to buy a car, to leave," Malcolm said slowly, "while the person who insulted them gets to stay?" The guard didn't respond. The silence from the rest of the room was deafening. Two staff members behind a glass office tried to look busy, fingers tapping keyboards with no actual typing. The white couple had turned away, pretending to browse while glancing over their shoulders. Not one person moved to speak. Not one person asked a question. Jordan looked around, heart pounding, throat dry. No one was coming. No one was going to stop it. He took a small step toward his father, voice low and tight. "Can we just go?" Malcolm turned to look at him. His son, standing there trying to stay strong but clearly wounded by something deeper than embarrassment. There was shame in his voice. Humiliation he hadn't earned. "No," Malcolm said softly. "Don't apologize for what they did. Jordan's words trailed off. His face flushed. He wasn't used to this. Not like this. Malcolm turned back to the guard and gave a single, controlled nod. "Fine." Jordan followed him, shoulders hunched but still upright. They walked side by side, silently, each step echoing through the dealership like a judgment passed. Customers cleared a quiet path, moving without speaking. No one held the door open. No one offered eye contact. The receptionist at the front desk busied herself with a clipboard she hadn't looked at all morning. As they neared the exit, Malcolm paused. He turned just enough to glance back at Greg, who had already resumed tapping his tablet, acting like the whole thing had never happened. "You made a decision today," Malcolm said clearly, without anger. "And so did I." Greg didn't even look up. "Sure." The door hissed open as they stepped through it, the sun spilling across the pavement like a spotlight. But it wasn't warm. It was sharp and glaring, too bright for the moment they were carrying. Outside, Malcolm and Jordan stood still for a beat, the silence between them stretching like a tight thread. "I'm sorry," Jordan whispered. Malcolm turned, voice firm but low. "Don't you ever apologize for their ignorance." Jordan looked away, jaw tight. "You walked in there with your head up," Malcolm continued, "and you'll keep walking that way. You don't let people like that decide what you're worth. You hear me?" Jordan nodded, but the ache didn't leave his chest. It sat there like a stone. Malcolm turned back toward the dealership, his expression calm but resolute, as if already seeing beyond the glass walls. "They saw what they wanted to see," he said quietly. Then he looked at Jordan, his voice steady. "But they're about to see who we really are." The sun was barely an hour into the sky when the black car pulled into the dealership's front lot. It wasn't flashy, just elegant, sleek, intentional. The deep obsidian paint seemed to drink in the morning light, refusing to gleam like the showroom cars that glittered on display behind the glass. Malcolm stepped out of the back seat and straightened the dark gray lapel of his tailored suit. The cut was sharp, the fabric clean as pressed steel. No hoodie this time. No fatherly ease. Today, he wore precision like armor. Behind him, two more doors opened. Daniel Klein, his longtime lawyer, emerged from one side, briefcase in hand. On the other, Marcus Yates, executive vice president of Rhodes Automotive Group, buttoned his jacket and followed Malcolm with a silent nod. The dealership's glass doors slid open as the trio approached. Inside, the mood was as bright and polished as ever, but the undercurrent was off. The receptionist at the front desk blinked twice when she saw them and instinctively sat up straighter. She didn't recognize Malcolm yet. Not without the beard he'd trimmed the night before. Not with the authority in his stride, or the way the two men flanked him like a procession. Not an entourage. "Good morning," she said automatically. "Welcome to Langston and Vale Motors. Do you have an appointment?" "We do," Daniel replied crisply. "With the branch manager, Elaine Foster." She clicked through her calendar and hesitated. She's in a meeting, but she'll want to take this one, Daniel said with a clipped smile. Tell her Malcolm Rhodes is here. The name didn't register right away. Not for her, but it would. The receptionist blinked, nodded, and picked up the phone. She turned her chair slightly, whispering into the receiver. Her eyes flicked toward the three men once, then back down. A moment later, she stood and gestured toward a waiting lounge with leather chairs. Please have a seat. Ms. Foster will be right with you. They didn't sit. Elaine appeared minutes later, her heels clicking hurriedly across the tile as she approached, with a practiced smile. She was in her early 50s, with carefully curled blonde hair and the brisk air of someone used to smoothing out customer complaints. She didn't recognize Malcolm either. Not yet, but she clearly knew this meeting wasn't casual. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said, extending a hand toward Daniel first, then Marcus. "I understand you had some concerns?" Malcolm didn't move. He simply looked at her. Elaine turned her attention to him, hand still halfway out. "And you are?" "My name is Malcolm Rhodes," he said quietly, with no grand tone, no need for bravado. "And I'm not here with concerns. I'm here with clarity." Elaine blinked. Daniel stepped in. "Miss Foster, perhaps we should speak somewhere more private." Elaine hesitated, just a flicker, then nodded and turned. "Right this way." They followed her into a corner office enclosed by glass, but with blinds drawn halfway for privacy. She offered seats this time, and this time they took them. Malcolm remained standing, facing the large dealership floor beyond the glass. The cars gleamed in the light. Greg was nowhere in sight. Elaine sat behind her desk and cleared her throat. "Mr. Rhodes, I'm sorry. I still don't understand the purpose of this visit. You had an incident here yesterday," Daniel began, opening his briefcase. "Your staff might have filed a report. A man and his son were removed from the premises after requesting service. No raised voices. No threats. No damage done. Just a refusal to serve and a public humiliation." Elaine's brow furrowed. "We haven't received any formal complaint." "Because I didn't file one," Malcolm said calmly, turning now to face her fully. "I don't do that." Elaine looked between them, her smile tightening at the edges. "Then what is it exactly that you do, Mr. Rhodes?" Malcolm didn't blink. "I supply your inventory." The silence that followed stretched long and stiff. Elaine blinked. "I'm sorry." "What?" Malcolm stepped forward, placing a single folder on her desk. "Rhodes Automotive Group. We handle distribution and fulfillment for every high-performance vehicle in your Tier 1 luxury inventory. We don't just deliver. We negotiate exclusivity rights. We vet showrooms. And we decide who gets access to limited releases, who stays on the distribution map, and who gets cut." Elaine opened the folder with mechanical fingers. Inside were documents bearing the Rhodes Automotive Group letterhead, signed by both national and regional distribution directors, contracts, delivery schedules, and one letter dated this morning, marked effective immediately. "We've reviewed your performance," Daniel said, voice professional but firm, "and following yesterday's incident, the decision has been made to terminate our agreement with this location." Elaine sat back slowly. "You can't do that without—" "We already have," Malcolm said. She blinked, struggling to find footing. "You're basing this decision off a single event?" "I'm basing it off a pattern," Malcolm said. "One that's been tolerated far too long. I just happened to be the one who walked into it yesterday." Her expression twisted slightly. "If this is about a misunderstanding with a salesperson, I'd be happy to address it internally." "You had your chance yesterday," Malcolm replied, his voice cutting through the room like a clean blade. "You didn't step in. No one did. A young black boy was humiliated in front of customers and staff because your people couldn't imagine he belonged. And I stood there and watched my son shrink under the weight of that silence." Elaine's posture stiffened. "We don't condone discrimination here, but you permitted it," Marcus said, speaking for the first time, his voice low. "And now your inventory line's gone." Elaine's eyes darted between the three men. "This will devastate us." Malcolm didn't flinch. "You should have thought of that before you decided who was worth serving." The air in the room felt thinner now. Elaine's hands slowly fell from the folder. Her voice was no longer smooth. This will take time to reverse. Paperwork, coordination. You can't just cut us off. Daniel tapped the folder gently. We can. We already have. Elaine stared at the folder as though its contents might change if she just blinked hard enough. She looked smaller now behind her oversized desk, the polished wood no longer a shield but a stage she hadn't prepared for, exposed beneath the weight of authority that had just shifted away from her and now sat quietly, decisively, with the man she had once allowed to be escorted out of her showroom. We can work something out, she said finally, her voice thinner than before, brittle at the edges like glass under pressure. You've been doing business with this chain for years. One incident, one miscommunication, shouldn't sever the whole relationship. I'll address it. I'll talk to him directly. There's no need to punish everyone for one man's actions. Malcolm remained composed, unmoved by the performance of sudden concern, his gaze never wavering as he stood across from her. This is not about punishment, he said with measured control. It's about principle, and we don't compromise principle for convenience. Not in my company. Elaine shifted in her seat, the gears behind her eyes turning frantically as she searched for a thread of leverage. Mr. Rhodes, please, this is a franchise location. We can offer a formal apology, retraining, a written commitment from corporate. Whatever you need to feel, this has been addressed. Malcolm's voice was calm, but resolute. I don't need to feel anything. What I need is integrity across every dealership that represents our inventory. What I need is to know that when my clients, especially my family, walk through your doors, they aren't measured against your assumptions before they're even greeted. That trust has been broken, Ms. Foster, and so has your contract. Elaine's lips parted as if to respond, but nothing came. Daniel Klein, seated quietly at Malcolm's left, opened his briefcase and retrieved a second folder, placing it neatly atop the first. This document confirms that the Rhodes Automotive Group has issued immediate termination of its supply agreement with this location, effective today. Any pending deliveries will be rerouted or canceled. Your access to inventory ends within the next 72 hours. Retrieval of unsold stock begins tomorrow. Elaine looked from Daniel to Malcolm, her breath shallow, her earlier composure unraveling in quiet panic. You can't be serious. I'm always serious when it comes to protecting my name, Malcolm replied. And I put my name behind every vehicle that enters your showroom. That ends now. A stiff knock broke through the silence. Elaine straightened automatically, grasping for structure in the moment. Yes? The receptionist opened the door halfway, eyes darting between the occupants. Greg is here. You asked me to call him in. Elaine hesitated, just for a moment, then nodded. Send him in. The door opened fully. Greg stepped in, still dressed in the navy suit he had worn the previous day, though the collar sat looser now and his tie was pulled slightly askew. His confidence entered the room a few seconds before he did, the smirk on his face already curling into shape as he glanced at Elaine, expecting a simple debrief or maybe a shallow reprimand. But then he saw Malcolm, and his entire posture shifted. The smirk didn't fade. It evaporated. His brows twitched in confusion, eyes narrowing in disbelief. The man he had dismissed as just another browser now stood in a tailored charcoal suit, commanding the room without raising a word. Gone was the quiet customer in streetwear. Standing before him now was a man who moved like he belonged at the head of a boardroom table, not browsing on a showroom floor. You, Greg muttered, a bitter confusion leaking into his voice. Wait, what is this? Malcolm didn't flinch. This is your reckoning. Greg turned to Elaine, gesturing with disbelief. You've got to be kidding me. This is about him? Elaine folded her hands on the desk, fingers interlocked with mechanical precision. Greg, Mr. Rhodes is not only a client. He is the CEO of the Rhodes Automotive Group. They supply our vehicles. Greg looked from her to Malcolm, then to Daniel, and back again, his brain trying to assemble pieces that no longer fit. That doesn't even make sense. I mean, he didn't look like someone with authority? Malcolm finished, his words even and sharp as flint. That was your first mistake. Greg scoffed, still clinging to remnants of his misplaced certainty. I didn't do anything wrong. He came in looking to stir something up, and now he's got you all dancing around like. Daniel stood slowly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't glare. He simply spoke with the careful cadence of someone who knew the law, the terms, and the end of the contract by heart. Mr. Sutherland, your employment here has been terminated, effective immediately. A formal letter will be emailed to you within the hour, and your access to dealership systems has already been revoked. What? Greg's voice cracked slightly, now reaching toward anger. You're firing me? For what? For following protocol? For protecting our assets from someone who looked out of place? You're being fired, Malcolm said, stepping forward now, each word delivered with the clarity of a final verdict. Because you turned away a father and son who came here in good faith. Because you humiliated a 17-year-old boy in front of a room full of people. Because you saw the color of our skin before you saw the purpose in our step. Greg's eyes narrowed. You can't ruin a man's life over this. I'm not ruining your life, Malcolm replied, voice cool. You did that all on your own. Greg turned to Elaine, desperation creeping into his tone. You're really letting this happen? She hesitated, but in the end, she didn't lift her eyes to meet his. I can't fix what you broke. You'll regret this, Greg snapped, his voice cracking as he backed toward the door, the righteous arrogance collapsing into something sour and aimless. Malcolm didn't respond. Daniel didn't move. Marcus didn't blink. Greg stood there a moment longer, breathing hard through his nose, his face flushed with rage he couldn't voice without making it worse. Then, without another word, he yanked open the door and left. Just outside, in the hallway, Jordan stood silently, tall, composed, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket. He hadn't spoken once since they arrived, but his eyes never left the room. He had seen it all. The reveal, the unraveling, the quiet shift in power that didn't rely on shouting or threats, but on truth, carried with unshakable calm. Malcolm met his son's gaze through the glass and gave a single nod. It wasn't for show. It was for him. To say, you saw what I needed you to see. This is how we carry ourselves. This is how we win without violence. Back in the room, Elaine rubbed her temple and let out a slow breath. Mr. Rhodes, I know there's nothing I can say to undo what happened, but I'd like to express formally my regret. I'm not interested in regret, Malcolm said, walking toward the door now. I'm interested in what rises from the ashes of what's been exposed. He opened the door, letting the morning light pour into the space behind him. The weight of his presence lingered in the room long after he stepped out. Jordan followed, his steps silent beside his father's. Daniel and Marcus came next, never once looking back. As they walked through the front doors of the dealership, every glass panel reflected not just power, but justice served, not through retaliation, but through the steady hand of consequence. The showroom that once ignored them was silent now, no longer glowing with untouchable prestige, but dimmed by the absence of something deeper than inventory, respect. They stepped into the waiting car and drove away, leaving behind the echo of a lesson delivered and the beginning of something far more enduring. The email came through at 7:42 a.m. the next morning. Brief, clinical, and final. Subject: termination of employment. Langston and Vale Motors. Dear Mr. Sutherland, following your conduct on the showroom floor and the resulting termination of our supplier relationship with Rhodes Automotive Group, your employment has been terminated effective immediately. Please return all company property by close of business. Respectfully, Elaine Foster. General Manager Greg stared at the screen for nearly 10 minutes, motionless in his apartment kitchen, the glow of the laptop casting cold light across his unshaven face. The remnants of yesterday's suit hung limply over the back of a chair, creased, sweat-stained at the collar. His tie had been tossed onto the counter like a thing discarded in anger. He hadn't slept. He kept rereading the words, waiting for them to change. They didn't. At first, he'd thought there'd be a meeting, some kind of follow-up or HR review that would walk him through next steps. Instead, there was just silence until the message arrived, reducing his years of sales records, his industry awards, and his inflated sense of invincibility to a single corporate bullet point. Still, Greg told himself it was temporary. People overreacted in the heat of embarrassment. This Rhodes guy might have walked in with power, but surely it would cool down. If not at Langston and Vale, then somewhere else. He had the numbers, the experience. He was a closer, and closers always landed on their feet. By 9:15 a.m., he had his resume polished and re-uploaded to every major dealership recruitment platform. By noon, he had submitted 5 applications. By the end of the day, he had sent 12. No calls came, not even an auto-response. By day 3, Greg had reached out directly to old contacts, former colleagues, assistant managers, old drinking buddies in mid-level hiring roles across the state. He kept the tone casual, framing his departure from Langston and Vale as a philosophical difference with new leadership. He asked if they had openings, maybe even something short-term while he considered his options. He didn't mention Rhodes by name, but Rhodes's name kept coming up anyway. Quietly, wordlessly. It was in the pauses before someone answered him. It was in the way voices shifted tone from familiarity to caution. Some barely disguised it. Others cut the conversation short, saying they'd check in later and never did. On day 5, a longtime friend in finance called him back, voice low and hesitant. "Look, man, I heard what happened," the friend said, "and it wasn't just about how you talked to that customer." Greg's jaw tensed. "I didn't even say anything that bad. You didn't say it to just anyone. You said it to Malcolm Rhodes. His company pulls weight everywhere. Distributors, auctions, fleet supply chains, even overseas allocation networks. The guy doesn't just sell cars. He decides who gets to sell them. I didn't know who he was. Doesn't matter," the voice replied, tired and blunt. "He's not telling people to blacklist you. He doesn't need to. They're doing it on their own. No one wants to be the store that hires the guy who insulted Rhodes's kid." Greg didn't respond. His knuckles whitened around the edge of his counter. He could hear the blood pumping in his ears, louder than the voice on the other end of the line. "Listen, I gotta go," the friend added. "But don't reach out again. Just trying to be honest." Click. The line went dead. Greg lowered the phone and stood there for a long time, staring at the wall. The next week bled into the one after. He sent more applications, reached lower. Dealerships in the outskirts, independents, used lots. Each time he followed up, the answer was silence. Or worse, a polite decline wrapped in HR language that barely concealed the black mark now clinging to his name. On the 10th day, he walked into a mid-tier dealership 2 towns over without an appointment. Dressed in a pressed shirt, clean-shaven, smiling with the same confidence he had once worn like a second skin, Greg walked up to the sales manager's desk, resume in hand. The man behind the desk looked at the paper for a moment, then glanced up at Greg. "I recognize your name," the manager said, his expression neutral but firm. "You're the one from Langston and Vale, right?" Greg tried to spin it, throwing on a thin smile. "That story's gotten a little twisted, you know. People love drama." The manager handed the resume back without another word. Greg stood there, the rejection sinking in not through what was said, but in the silence it rode in on. He didn't argue, didn't fight. He simply turned and left. By the end of the 3rd week, his accounts were slipping into overdraft. The lease on his car had been canceled after a missed payment, and the last dealership-issued credit card he'd relied on had been frozen. He sat in his apartment at night, staring at listings he couldn't get a call back from, watching the career he once thought untouchable slip further and further from his grasp. The people who used to answer his texts with emojis and inside jokes now responded with a single line, if at all. And all the while, in a part of the city Greg never passed through, something else was beginning to take root. Across town, a small commercial lot on the corner of Franklin and Marston had recently changed hands. The building still had the bones of a dealership. Floor-to-ceiling glass windows, a raised interior platform meant for spotlighting cars, and a back-office layout perfect for client consultation. It was the exact dealership that had rejected Malcolm and his son, Langston and Vale Motors, soon to be stripped of its name and purpose, and already scheduled for closure after the supplier contract was terminated. By the time construction began, the building had sat dormant for months. That changed quietly. Permits were filed under the name of a holding company no one thought to connect to Rhodes Automotive Group. Construction trucks arrived at odd hours. Not loud, not disruptive. Just steady. A new security system was installed. The old showroom glass was cleaned and resealed. Inside, the space was repainted with matte tones that suggested elegance without opulence. Lighting fixtures were updated to soften the glare and focus attention on the vehicles that would soon arrive. Malcolm never posted about it. He didn't need to. The project wasn't for press. It wasn't about a statement. It was about creation. A slow, deliberate act of building something that would outlive the insult, something that would serve as a living counterpoint to the place where his son had been made to feel small. Jordan visited the site with him once, standing in the middle of the hollowed-out floor with sawdust still clinging to the corners. He looked around, absorbing the vision quietly, and asked, "So this is it?" Malcolm nodded, arms crossed as he surveyed the space. "This is where it starts. What are you going to call it?" Malcolm glanced at him with a half-smile. "Haven't decided yet, but I know who's going to run it." Jordan blinked. "Who?" Malcolm looked at his son for a long moment. "You." Jordan laughed nervously. "Come on. I just turned 17. And you're already stronger than most men twice your age. What you saw back there, what you lived through, that wasn't just for pain, son. That was preparation. And I don't expect you to run it now. But one day, this'll be yours." Jordan turned back to the walls around them, imagining what could be. The showroom wasn't finished, but it didn't feel empty. It felt ready. The scent of brewed coffee and fresh cinnamon biscuits drifted through the narrow space of the cafe, curling in the morning air like a quiet invitation. It was the kind of place without a neon sign or trendy Instagram corner, just a hand-painted wooden board hanging above the door, and a row of weathered planters that bloomed in spring without fail. Turner's Cafe had been there long before developers began eyeing the neighborhood, long before the high-rises stretched above it, and long before Malcolm Rhodes became a name whispered in boardrooms and business circles. But this place wasn't about whispers. It was where people spoke plainly. Malcolm had taken his usual seat in the back corner, tucked beside the window with just enough view of the street to track the pulse of the day. His coffee sat cooling in front of him, untouched for the moment, while he reviewed a folded packet of plans for the new dealership's grand opening. The sketches were clean, modern, minimalist, with soft slate tones and wood textures that nodded to heritage without feeling heavy. The logo had been finalized just that morning. It would read, Kingston Auto and Culture, a tribute to Malcolm's father's middle name and a nod to roots too often buried under survival. But the real reason Malcolm was here had little to do with paperwork. He listened. At a nearby table, 3 men in their 40s leaned into a conversation already midstream, their voices low but animated. 2 wore city utility jackets still dusted with soil and cement. The third was dressed in pressed slacks and a tie loosened at the neck. "I'm telling you," one said, gesturing with his coffee spoon, "he didn't just walk in there angry. He walked in like the whole building was already his, and they just hadn't figured it out yet." The second man leaned forward, and then what happened? He shut it down. Quiet, legal, no shouting. Just boom. Dealership cut from the supply chain. And the salesman? Fired on the spot. Man, I heard about that. Ain't no one messin' with Rhodes now. Malcolm kept his face still, his eyes on the papers before him, but his ears remained sharp. They hadn't noticed him in the corner. He didn't want them to. Across the room, a mother with 2 children sat scrolling through her phone. A headline in bold font flashed briefly on her screen. CEO shuts down luxury dealership after racial profiling incident. The little boy beside her leaned over and asked something. She nodded, pointing to the article, and then to him. "That's the man I told you about," she said. "The one who stood up for his son." The boy nodded slowly, then turned back to his pancakes. It wasn't about fame. Malcolm hadn't issued a statement. He hadn't sat down with news anchors or posted anything for social media. But the story had traveled anyway, through barbershops, over dinner tables, across group chats, and under porch lights at dusk. It traveled because it was real. Because it wasn't theater. Because it was one of those rare moments when someone had not only pushed back, but changed something, and people had noticed. A soft scrape of chair legs interrupted his thoughts. A man in a crisp tan blazer approached his table, his face lighting with recognition once he drew close enough. "Mr. Rhodes?" Malcolm looked up, his expression polite, not surprised. "I thought that was you," the man said, extending a hand. "Gabe Morrison. I run Morrison and Hill Construction. Mostly contracting work, some commercial development." Malcolm shook his hand. "I've heard of you." Gabe nodded, eyes sharp with sincerity. "I just wanted to say what you did that mattered. A lot of us talk about change, but you moved something. Publicly. Decisively. That dealership treated folks sideways for years, and most people just took it, but you made sure no one had to anymore." "I didn't do it for applause," Malcolm said. "I know," Gabe replied. "That's why it's working." There was a pause, not awkward, just the kind that lets respect settle between 2 men who understood the weight of leadership. "I've got a few younger guys who are starting their own shop," Gabe added. "Auto detailing, custom wraps, street performance tuning. They've got vision but no funding. If you're ever looking for partners on the new venture, or even a supplier arm with local roots, just say the word. They'd move mountains for someone like you." Malcolm nodded. "Tell them to come by the site next Thursday. I'd like to meet them." Gabe's smile widened. "Will do." And again, respect. He turned and walked away without another word, understanding the unspoken boundaries of Malcolm's solitude. Malcolm watched him go, then returned to his papers. But he didn't read. He thought about Jordan. He thought about the way his son had watched, silently, as an entire room shifted around the strength of his father's calm. He thought about the future he wanted to hand down. Not just a business, but a blueprint for dignity. That evening, Malcolm gathered in a private conference room above a quiet workspace on the west side. The kind rented by entrepreneurs who still remembered what it meant to build something brick by brick. No PR teams, no polished pitches, just purpose. 5 people joined him. Gabe had followed through and brought 2 of his mentees, Isaiah Perry, 28, a mechanic with a head for performance systems and a mind like an engineer, and Deanna Tate, 32, a specialist in vehicle wraps and branding who had made a name customizing cars for artists and small businesses. She walked in with blueprints and more confidence than most CEOs. Joining them were Kamari Lewis, an accountant and numbers strategist who had helped launch 3 food trucks into profitable franchises, and Renee Jefferson, a lawyer who had taken on zoning cases, redevelopment fights, and discriminatory contract disputes for over a decade. Malcolm didn't begin with slides. He didn't talk percentages or market forecasts. He started with a single question. "What does ownership look like to you?" And they answered. Ownership, Deanna said, meant walking into a space and knowing it could never be taken from you because it was built in your name, by your hands. Ownership, Kamari added, meant equity, not just profit, but a say in direction, design, and destiny. For Isaiah, it meant family, legacy. A chance to build something his nephew could one day point at and say, "That's ours." And for Renee, it meant leverage, power, a seat at a table most of them had been locked out of, not by force, but by omission. Malcolm listened. He nodded. Then he pulled open his folder and revealed the architectural plans for Kingston Auto and Culture. "Then let's build it that way," he said. The room went quiet, not with hesitation, but with the kind of pause that only comes when people realize they're not dreaming. The soft thrum of electric saws echoed faintly from the back lot as the sun crept higher above the warehouse district. Inside, what had once been a shuttered dealership, the light filtered through scaffolding and half-hung fixtures, catching on the beams of freshly sanded wood and sheets of glass waiting to be installed. The floor still smelled of polyurethane and lacquer, but the energy was different now. No longer a space left behind, but a space in motion. Malcolm stood near the far window, sleeves rolled to his forearms, reviewing a set of revised floor plans with Marcus at his side. His blazer hung over the back of a nearby chair. He didn't need it here. Not in this place. Not surrounded by people who didn't care what he wore, only what he stood for. "It's almost there," Marcus said, scanning the sheet with a careful eye. "The redesign on the consultation area opens it up, makes it more personal, less transactional." Malcolm nodded slowly, his gaze lingering on the blueprint. "That's the point." He said it quietly, but the words carried weight, like everything about this place did now. Every decision, every material, every line of sight was rooted in something more than aesthetics. It was about redefining experience, about making sure that when someone walked in, they weren't just being sold something. They were being seen. Marcus studied his old friend for a moment. "You've got that look again." "What look?" "The one you get when you're building something you don't want to admit is personal." Malcolm allowed a faint smile to cross his face, but it didn't stay long. "It's not about getting even." "I didn't say it was. Malcolm exhaled, resting one hand on the frame of the window beside him. "That day, when they walked us out, I didn't care about the car. I didn't even care about the contract. I looked at Jordan and saw something fold in him. Something I wasn't ready to see." "You saw him doubt himself," Marcus said. Malcolm nodded. "And I realized that if I left it there, if I let him carry that without giving him something bigger, it would settle in him. It would turn into quiet shame. That's what we inherit sometimes. Not just trauma, doubt." Marcus didn't speak right away. He looked out at the lot where workers moved slowly beneath the rising sun, lifting beams and maneuvering ladders with practiced coordination. "I still remember the first time I walked into a dealership," he said after a while. "I was 22, wearing a shirt with too much starch and shoes I borrowed from my uncle. The guy made me stand outside while he checked inventory. I waited 40 minutes before I realized he wasn't coming back." Malcolm turned to him. "I promised myself that day I'd never walk into a place I couldn't walk out of with my head up," Marcus said. "But you're building a place where no one has to promise themselves anything just to feel human." Malcolm's silence was answer enough. Behind them, footsteps approached. Deanna entered first, followed by Isaiah and Kamari. Renee had stayed behind to file zoning paperwork for a city grant they had applied for under the name the Kingston Initiative, which would be the nonprofit branch of the dealership's community investment program. Financial literacy, internship pipelines, repair training for local high schoolers. It was early, but the vision was already seeded in every meeting they held. Deanna carried a stack of sample branding layouts under one arm, her expression focused but energized. "We finalized the wrap templates for the first 3 display models," she said, laying them on the center table. "Color palettes, font variations, tagline options. Let me know if anything needs to shift before the press preview." Isaiah added, "I also locked in a vendor for custom tuning kits, Black-owned, Atlanta-based. They're ready to scale production if we feature their line at launch." Kamari handed Malcolm a tablet with a cash flow forecast. "With the initial investment pool and the revised lease on this property, we're sustainable for the first 18 months, even at low-margin projections." We'll hit surplus inside the first year if we host even 2 events quarterly. Malcolm took it all in with a steady nod, letting the momentum of their work fold around him. This wasn't just a dealership anymore. It was a platform, an ecosystem, an answer to the question people had been asking for generations. What do we build when the doors we knock on never open? We build our own, and then we invite others inside. "Where's Jordan?" Diana asked, glancing toward the hallway. "He's coming," Malcolm said. Right on cue, the outer door creaked open, and Jordan stepped inside. He looked slightly unsure at first, still adjusting to being part of this world rather than just observing it, but he carried himself with more awareness than he had weeks ago. The change wasn't loud. It was in his posture, in the way his eyes scanned the space before settling on his father. "You made it," Malcolm said, motioning him over. Jordan joined the circle, nodding to the others, still unfamiliar, but no longer just the kid. He'd heard bits and pieces about what was happening here. He had walked the space during demolition, sat beside his father during long drives when Malcolm would talk, without really thinking about how much he was revealing. And now, as he stood among blueprints, team leads, and future partners, it finally clicked. "This whole thing," Jordan said, voice steady but low. "It wasn't just about shutting them down." Malcolm looked at him. "No, you were already thinking beyond it." "I had to be," Malcolm said, "because if all I did was take something from them, I'd have left nothing in its place. And if we don't build what we want to see, we leave our sons and daughters walking into spaces we were thrown out of, still begging for permission." Jordan swallowed, feeling the words settle in his chest. "And this, Kingston Auto, this is ours?" Malcolm nodded. "Yours, theirs, ours. A place where excellence isn't filtered through suspicion, where value walks through the door wearing any skin, any clothes, and still gets seen for what it is." Jordan didn't answer right away. He looked around at the team, Diana still laying out her designs, Isaiah on a call in the corner, Kamari recalibrating budgets without being asked. They were all working, all building something together, and they weren't here for applause. They were here because the world had left them out of enough rooms, and now, finally, one was being built with their names etched into the frame. "I want to learn," Jordan said, looking back at his father. "Not just about sales or operations, about everything, about what it takes to make something last." Malcolm reached out, placed a firm hand on his son's shoulder, and smiled, not with pride, but with purpose. "Then stay close and pay attention, because what we're building here isn't just business, it's proof." The construction hum continued outside. Inside, the conversations layered with plans, projections, and laughter that rang deeper than design. Justice had been served weeks ago. But this was legacy. The conference room inside the old bank building smelled faintly of lemon polish and worn carpet, its walls lined with framed photographs of community events from decades past, black and white snapshots of ribbon cuttings, parades, and long-retired council members posing beside civic plaques. The windows let in morning light, filtered through blinds that hadn't been changed in years, giving the space a muted yellow glow. It wasn't glamorous, but Malcolm hadn't asked for glamour. He had asked for ears. Around the long oak table sat a small group of people who understood how things moved behind the curtain. On Malcolm's left was Daniel Klein, his attorney, already flipping through a prepared packet of zoning maps, community reinvestment guidelines, and small business tax incentives. Across from them sat Councilwoman Teresa Ellis, a sharp, poised woman in her late 50s, whose district included the block where the new dealership was rising. Beside her was City Development Director Alan Romero, younger but savvy, with an eye for metrics and the political instincts of someone twice his age. Rounding out the table were two aides from the mayor's office, notebooks open, pens poised, ready to absorb or record whatever mattered. Jordan sat 2 chairs behind Malcolm, off to the side near the window. He didn't speak. He didn't take notes. He was there to watch. His father had told him as much before they entered. "What I say matters," Malcolm had told him. But how I say it, that's what you need to study. Now, as introductions concluded and papers rustled into position, Malcolm leaned slightly forward, his fingers interlocked on the table. "I appreciate all of you making time," he began, voice steady and unhurried. "I know you're approached by a lot of people with a lot of projects. Most are looking for permits, exemptions, funding. Some are chasing press. But I'm not here for any of that." Councilwoman Ellis raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Then what are you here for, Mr. Rhodes?" "I'm here because I don't want to build another dealership. I want to build a keystone." Alan Romero tilted his head slightly. "You mean like a flagship operation?" "I mean something foundational," Malcolm replied, his tone deepening just enough to anchor the word, "something that holds weight. I want Kingston Auto and Culture to be more than a business that sells vehicles. I want it to be a center of influence, a model for economic revitalization driven by community-first design." Daniel slid a packet across the table. "We've outlined a proposal for a community advisory board, a job training partnership with East Central High School, and a local contracting clause that ensures a minimum of 70% of all services are sourced from within a 10-mile radius." Ellis glanced through the packet, nodding slowly. "That's more thorough than most nonprofit expansions we see. You're building this without public funds?" Malcolm nodded. "Entirely private investment." "Then why come to us?" she asked, curious now, not skeptical. "Because we're not doing this in a vacuum," Malcolm said. "This project will affect zoning, traffic flow, hiring trends, and eventually housing. I want the city to be a partner, not just a gatekeeper. I want to build with the current of the community, not against it." Romero folded his hands. "You're asking us to signal institutional support without requiring institutional control. I'm asking you to align with something that's going to rise either way," Malcolm said. "But if you align with it now, you become part of the solution early, rather than catching up after the impact has already happened." Jordan watched the exchange, absorbing the calm precision in his father's tone. He wasn't demanding. He wasn't apologizing. He was inviting people into something that would happen with or without their help, making it clear that this wasn't a plea. It was an opportunity. Ellis tapped the cover of the packet lightly with her pen. "You've done your homework." "I've been doing it for years," Malcolm said. "I've watched other communities get boxed out of growth because the structure was never meant to include them. This time, we build the structure from the community." One of the mayor's aides leaned forward. "What about economic competition? I assume you're aware of the larger dealership networks nearby, some of which have already expressed concern about this location's resurgence." Malcolm didn't flinch. "They're concerned because they're used to a system that favors familiarity. I'm not asking them to move. I'm offering an alternative. If competition makes them nervous, then maybe they should ask themselves why." The aide didn't respond immediately. Romero gave a short nod. "That kind of confidence usually comes with backing. I assume you've already secured your inventory pipeline?" Malcolm's expression didn't shift. "Every vehicle that rolls into our showroom will come directly from Rhodes Automotive Group. I control the channel." Ellis looked up from her papers. "That explains the headlines." "I don't care about the headlines," Malcolm said. "I care about the kids walking past the front windows every day. I care about them seeing themselves on both sides of the desk. I care about the next generation of mechanics, sales managers, financial planners, and creative directors knowing they don't have to leave their community to be part of something excellent." There was a beat of silence. Even Daniel glanced over, sensing the weight of the moment. From his seat in the corner, Jordan felt something shift in his chest. It wasn't just admiration. It was understanding. His father wasn't just building for pride. He was building as a form of protest, a form of investment, and a form of inheritance. And he was doing it with the same quiet resolve he had shown in that glass room weeks ago when the world had tried to shrink him down. Ellis finally closed the folder and leaned back. "Mr. Rhodes, I've been sitting at this table for over 20 years. I've heard a lot of men talk about vision. Most of them don't back it with anything but charm and charts. But what I hear in your voice is clarity. That goes a long way with me." Romero nodded. "You'll have our support on the zoning requests, and I'll speak to the mayor personally about the impact strategy. If this project is what you say it is, we want to see it succeed." Malcolm nodded once, the gesture appreciative but not boastful. "Good. Then let's get to work." As the meeting wrapped and chairs began sliding back from the table, Jordan stood as well, his eyes meeting his father's. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Malcolm gave him a subtle nod, a silent acknowledgement that the lesson had been absorbed. Leadership wasn't about noise. It was about presence and clarity, and the willingness to build something that couldn't be ignored. The sound of hammering echoed across the stripped concrete, rhythmic and sharp like punctuation in the morning air. Dust hovered lazily in the shafts of sunlight, pouring through the now empty frame of what had once been Langston and Vale Motors. The polished showroom floors were gone. So were the luxury banners, the monogrammed rugs, the spotless counters where brochures used to sit untouched by anyone who didn't fit the image. In their place were exposed studs, pulled wiring, and stacks of drywall waiting to reshape the interior into something entirely different. Malcolm stood just outside the skeletal entryway, his coat open to the chill that lingered despite the clear sky. He watched the crew work for a few moments, their voices low, their movements purposeful. They weren't just tearing something down. They were making room. Behind him, Jordan stepped out of the car and joined his father at the edge of the site. He wore a thick sweatshirt and gloves, more for the ritual of being useful than for the weather. His eyes scanned the place slowly, taking in the transformation. The bones were the same, but the soul was different now. It was no longer a monument to exclusion. It was a place in motion, reclaiming its form, redirecting its future. Malcolm didn't say anything right away. He let the silence stretch between them, filled only by the scrape of metal and the occasional thud of wood dropped against wood. Jordan finally broke it. "It doesn't even look the same." "It's not supposed to," Malcolm said, his voice quiet but certain. "We're not just rebuilding a place. We're repurposing the ground it stands on." He stepped forward, walking across the gravel path that would soon become the new entrance. Jordan followed, their steps in sync, the rhythm of movement echoing the deeper rhythm that had carried them since that day they were turned away. They walked past the open bay where a new consultation area was being framed, then through what used to be the main reception, now gutted to its concrete foundation. Malcolm paused beside one of the support beams, its paint chipped, but still standing strong. He placed a hand against it, then looked at his son. "You remember where we stood?" he asked. Jordan nodded slowly. "Right by that desk. The one with the glass top." "That desk is gone now," Malcolm said. "But I still remember how it felt. I remember your face, the way your shoulders tensed, how quiet you got." Jordan looked down for a moment. "I didn't want to say the wrong thing." "There was nothing wrong with what you said," Malcolm replied. "You were respectful, patient. But I saw what it did to you, how it made you question yourself, and that's what I couldn't leave standing." He turned and walked toward the far end of the space, where the new office wall was being prepped. He gestured to the empty floor beneath their feet. "This," he said, "this is where you'll make your decisions one day. Where people will come to you, not to be judged, but to be seen. And they'll bring their families, their futures, their hopes with them. You won't just be selling cars, Jordan. You'll be giving people back something they've been denied for generations." Jordan looked around again, this time with new eyes. The debris no longer looked chaotic. It looked intentional, like something in the middle of becoming. "I used to think success meant walking into a place and getting treated like I belonged," he said quietly. "But now I see it's bigger than that. It's owning the place, making it so no one has to prove they belong at all." Malcolm smiled, just slightly, the corners of his mouth lifting with quiet pride. That's it. They stood there for a while, surrounded by noise, but wrapped in something deeper. Understanding. passed between generations without the need for ceremony. Most people think power is about money, Malcolm continued, or status. But real power is knowing you don't have to lower your voice to be heard. It's knowing you can change the room just by staying in it. Jordan nodded slowly. That's what you did. Malcolm looked at him, the expression in his eyes both proud and serious. No, that's what we did. That day, they expected us to leave quietly, to accept their version of who we were. But we didn't. We didn't shout. We didn't curse. We didn't make a scene. We made a statement. By walking out with our dignity and walking back in with our authority. He placed a hand on Jordan's shoulder. That's your real birthday gift. Not the car, not even this building, but the example. Jordan didn't respond right away. He looked up at his father, then back out at the unfinished space, seeing in it not just walls and fixtures, but something living, something that would last. Thank you, he said finally. Malcolm nodded. Keep showing up. Keep listening. And when it's time, take it further than I ever could. Behind them, a construction worker called out about a delivery schedule. Another crew wheeled in a stack of display lights through the back entrance. The transformation was steady, unstoppable. Piece by piece, the old shell was becoming something new. Father and son stood side by side as the dust floated around them, sunlight cutting through the space like promise made visible. The work wasn't finished, but the foundation had been laid, not just in concrete, but in character. The final week before the grand opening was supposed to be ceremonial, a tightening of bolts, a polishing of glass, a quiet celebration of what had already been built. But on Monday morning, less than 5 days before the ribbon would be cut, Malcolm received an email flagged urgent with a subject line that read, Zoning Compliance Review. Suspension pending final inspection. At first, he thought it was a clerical error. It wasn't. By the time he arrived at the site, Daniel was already there, standing beside 2 city inspectors, and a third man Malcolm didn't recognize, older, square-shouldered, with the brittle confidence of someone used to control. He wore a city contractor's badge and spoke with the rehearsed diction of someone hiding intent behind protocol. We're here for a follow-up review, the man said as Malcolm approached. There have been concerns raised about fire safety access, parking orientation, and rear visibility from the loading dock. Until those are re-evaluated, your certificate of occupancy will be delayed. Malcolm looked at him without blinking. This property passed all 3 inspections last Thursday. The man nodded, as if the facts were mere formalities. New information came in over the weekend. Daniel stepped forward. What new information? And from whom? The man's eyes flicked over to the inspectors, then back to Malcolm. Just fulfilling our due diligence. That was the moment Malcolm knew this wasn't about due diligence. It was about disruption. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He simply took a breath and nodded. Walk me through the new concerns. Over the next 45 minutes, Malcolm listened, calm, alert, as vague issues were raised, half-documented concerns repeated without clear sources, and forms were referenced that no one seemed able to produce in full. The inspectors looked uncomfortable. One kept checking his tablet. The other couldn't meet Malcolm's eyes for longer than a few seconds. By the end of the review, Malcolm knew exactly what this was. Someone, maybe a competitor, maybe a former partner loyal to Langston and Vale, had made a call. Maybe several. Maybe even leaned on someone at city level with enough pull to slow things down, but not enough power to stop them outright. It wasn't the kind of sabotage that announced itself loudly. It was quieter, more familiar, the kind meant to frustrate, to delay, to chip away at resolve and momentum. When they left, Malcolm didn't follow them out. He stood near the front entrance, arms folded, looking out at the parking lot where the first deliveries had already begun arriving. 6 new vehicles, wrapped and waiting to be placed inside the showroom floor that Diana's team had finished dressing the night before. Daniel joined him after a moment, his expression tight. I can push this. We've got legal grounds to escalate. I can get City Hall to intervene. Malcolm shook his head. Not yet. Daniel looked at him. They're trying to gut you by 1,000 paper cuts. They're trying to remind me this city still belongs to them, Malcolm said. And I'm going to remind them that it doesn't. Daniel raised an eyebrow. You've got something planned? I always do. That evening, Malcolm made a quiet call to Councilwoman Ellis. Within 24 hours, he had a closed-door meeting scheduled with Romero from Development and 2 senior aides from the mayor's compliance office. This time, there were no polite introductions or exploratory questions. This wasn't a coincidence, Malcolm said, placing 3 printed copies of the inspection history across the table. Every milestone met, every document signed. And now, with 4 days to go, we're suddenly facing phantom infractions? Romero flipped through the papers and sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. I've already heard rumblings. Someone's leveraging old networks. Former city contractor who had ties to Langston and Vale. He's leaning on relationships that haven't caught up with the new landscape. I don't need to know who, Malcolm said. I just need it stopped. The mayor's aide spoke next. We've reviewed your file. Everything's in order. We'll push this through and issue a letter to override the stall. It'll be clean by Friday. I don't want a favor, Malcolm replied. I want fairness. That's the difference between them and me. Romero looked up. You'll get both. Malcolm stood. Then we're done here. On Thursday afternoon, Jordan met Malcolm at the site to walk through the final layout. The signage was up. The lights had been tested. The cars were polished and placed with care, each model spaced in full view through the floor-to-ceiling windows. A small placard near the entrance bore a simple statement: Kingston Auto and Culture, a legacy in motion. Jordan trailed behind his father as they walked past the waiting lounge, through the back offices, and into the main display area where sunlight painted long lines across the floor. He hadn't said much during the drive over, but he had been watching, paying attention to every phone call, every quiet conversation Malcolm had handled over the past week. You didn't fight them, Jordan said finally, almost in disbelief. You didn't go to the press. You didn't blast them online. You just worked around it. Malcolm turned to him, his face calm. Because if I had fought back the way they expected, I would have played into the image they already painted of me. Loud, angry, dangerous. That's how they win. They don't beat you in public. They push you until you beat yourself. Jordan looked around the space again. So instead, you proved them wrong, quietly. No, Malcolm said. I proved us right. There's a difference. They stood together at the center of the floor as workers carried the last crates out the back, clearing the way for what would come tomorrow. Press, ribbon, applause, celebration. But in this moment, there was only stillness. Malcolm wasn't celebrating yet. The suspension was lifted less than 24 hours after Malcolm's final meeting with city officials. A letter from the Office of Compliance arrived mid-morning, printed, signed, and hand-delivered by an aide who didn't linger for small talk. It cleared all outstanding concerns. No violations found, no restrictions imposed. The inspectors were reassigned quietly. The contractor who had initiated the disruption had his consulting credentials revoked, pending a formal review. There were no press releases, no apologies, just a clean document stamped with the city's seal, affirming what Malcolm had known all along: he had done everything right. He didn't frame the letter, he filed it. By Friday morning, Kingston Auto and Culture stood ready. Glass shining, paint crisp, and every corner of the space humming with quiet anticipation. The entire team had arrived early. Deanna had spent the night before adjusting final display lighting to highlight the wrap designs she'd labored over for weeks. Isaiah had done a last diagnostic sweep on every vehicle, ensuring each engine purred with showroom precision. Kamari had double-checked every financial document, every event permit, every tablecloth, and guest list entry. Even Renee, fresh from a city hall negotiation, showed up in a deep blue suit with her tablet in hand and her usual command of everything happening backstage. Jordan arrived just after 8, dressed in tailored black slacks and a pressed button-down. He stood straighter than usual. Not stiff, just aware, conscious of what this day meant. Not just to his father, not just to the team, but to him. This was the day they had reclaimed the narrative. By 10 o'clock, the lot was filled. The crowd extended beyond the velvet ropes, spilling onto the sidewalk. A local gospel jazz band played under a small tent near the reception table, where a group of volunteers handed out custom pins that read, "Legacy built here." Neighbors mingled beside business owners. City leaders shook hands with former skeptics. Local media vans lined the curb. A familiar news anchor stood near the front steps, her camera crew preparing to go live. None of them had been invited for spectacle. They came because the story had traveled, and they wanted to witness the ending for themselves. Or maybe the beginning. Inside, Malcolm stood in the main entryway, reviewing the order of speakers and ceremonial steps, with the composure of someone who had waited years for this moment, and now held it in his hands like something sacred. He looked to his right. Jordan stood beside him, silent but alert. "You ready?" Malcolm asked. Jordan nodded. "I think I finally get it now." "What's that?" Jordan looked at the crowd forming behind the glass, at the people smiling, the reporters adjusting mics, the workers who had built this place standing just behind the ropes. It was never about the dealership. Malcolm smiled. No, it wasn't. At exactly 11, the music softened and the PA system clicked on. Councilwoman Ellis stepped to the small podium placed outside the front entrance. She offered a short introduction, highlighting the economic potential of the project, the number of local contracts awarded, and the community programs tied to the initiative. Her speech was warm, clear, and measured, ending with a nod toward Malcolm. "Some people build businesses," she said. "Others build movements. Mr. Rhodes, it's your turn." Malcolm stepped forward as the crowd quieted. The wind caught the edge of his coat. He adjusted the mic slightly and looked out, not at the cameras, but at the faces. "I won't speak long," he began, "because today isn't about performance. It's about presence." He let the words settle. "Presence," he repeated, "is what was denied to us when my son and I stood in a showroom not far from here, asked for service, and were told, through every gesture, every silence, every slight, that we didn't belong, but we didn't walk away, ashamed. We walked away, determined." There was a murmur of affirmation from the crowd, quiet but felt. "Some of you know what that feels like," Malcolm continued. "To be told you're too loud, too poor, too late, too black, to be anything but invisible. But invisibility is a choice made by others. Dignity is a choice we make ourselves. And today, we're choosing to be seen." He stepped slightly aside and gestured toward the building behind him. "Kingston Auto and Culture isn't just a place to buy a car. It's a place to build careers, a place to start conversations, a place to walk through the door and feel respected. Because we're not just building profit here, we're building power." The applause began slowly, then grew, not thunderous, not wild, but deep, grounded. The kind of applause that came not from excitement, but recognition. Malcolm turned toward the door, motioning to Jordan. "My son stood beside me the day we were turned away. He watched me take the long road back here, not with revenge, but with purpose. And today, I ask him to stand beside me again as we cut the ribbon and open the doors to the future we're building." Jordan stepped forward, joining his father at the base of the steps. Someone handed them a pair of ceremonial scissors. They took the ribbon together. When the blade sliced through, a cheer rose, not orchestrated, but organic. People clapped. Some whistled. Others simply nodded, hands in pockets, hearts full. The doors opened. The guests filed in. The showroom that had once stood for exclusion now pulsed with community. Children walked beside their parents, pointing at the cars. Artists eyed the gallery wall featuring local photographers and painters. Young mechanics toured the service bay in the back, where Isaiah gave a tour that was more mentorship than orientation. Diana explained the thought process behind her design choices to a group of teen creatives from the nearby art school. Kamari shook hands with 3 small business owners looking for partnership. Renee stood near the refreshments, discussing the legal clinic schedule for the following quarter. Media coverage poured out within the hour. Headlines read, "Former discrimination site transformed into Black-owned powerhouse. Justice served. Legacy launched. Kingston Auto, where pride has a parking space." But inside the building, none of that mattered. What mattered was the energy, the feeling that something had shifted, not just in the concrete and steel, but in the psyche of the people gathered. They had seen a man endure disrespect, stand tall through it, and return with something not just better, but bigger. As the opening day unfolded, Jordan remained close to his father, watching the way he moved through each conversation, not rushed, not distracted, present, focused. At one point, a reporter asked if he would ever expand, take the concept to other cities, scale the model. Malcolm didn't promise anything. He just smiled and said, "One foundation at a time." And when the crowd thinned and the sun dipped low enough to throw gold across the showroom floor, Malcolm sat beside his son near the gallery wall. He looked tired, but peaceful. "You proud of yourself yet?" Jordan asked, only half teasing. "I'm proud of us," Malcolm replied, "because we didn't just answer disrespect. We built a response no one can ignore." Jordan nodded. "This was the real revenge." Malcolm shook his head. "No, this is redemption. Revenge fades. Redemption builds." They sat in the quiet together, the echoes of celebration still lingering in the air. What began as a humiliation had become a home. Weeks passed, then months. Kingston Auto and Culture became more than a dealership. It became a fixture, a conversation starter, a point of pride. People didn't just come to buy cars. They came to sit, to learn, to connect. It was where high school students came on Saturdays for mentorship and hands-on training in the service bays. It was where first-time buyers asked real questions and got honest answers. It was where small vendors found partnerships, and artists found wall space, and job seekers found a front desk that didn't screen them out based on how they looked when they walked through the door. The media moved on, as media always does. But the people stayed. The neighborhood stayed. And something deeper began to settle. Something steady. Something that lasted. Malcolm no longer came in every day. He didn't have to. He arrived early on Mondays and late on Fridays, checking in with each department, answering questions when needed, but never hovering. His office remained untouched, except for a shelf he filled with framed photos. None of them press shots or business accolades, just moments that mattered. Jordan shaking hands with a new hire. Deanna standing beside a car she'd wrapped in tribute to local culture. Isaiah covered in grease, laughing beside 3 interns. Kamari setting up folding chairs before a community forum. Renee leading a contract clinic beside a corkboard covered in thank you notes from residents who never thought they'd find legal help they could trust. On one quiet afternoon, Malcolm sat in the showroom lounge, sipping black coffee while the sunlight filtered through the windows. He wore a navy sweater and slacks. No blazer, no tie. Just a man at peace, observing what he had built. Jordan entered from the side, carrying a folder under his arm, his expression focused, but not tense. He had just finished onboarding a new hire, his 3rd that month. He paused when he saw his father. "You're early," Malcolm said, smiling faintly. Jordan shrugged, wasn't planning to leave. He sat beside his father, the folder still tucked beneath his arm. Malcolm glanced at it. "Another team lead?" Jordan nodded. "Community relations. She used to run outreach at her church. Knows everyone. Already brought in 2 new partnerships." Malcolm nodded slowly, letting the silence sit for a moment before speaking again. "You've been stepping into more lately." Jordan gave a quiet laugh. "It just makes sense now. What this place is. What you really built. It's not about selling cars. It's about making people feel like they matter when they walk in. Like they're home." Malcolm turned to look at his son. "That's all I ever wanted. For you. For this." Jordan finally handed him the folder. I want to take on more, officially. I've been doing the work, but I think it's time I own it. Malcolm opened the folder. It was a proposal. Clean, clear, organized in Jordan's handwriting. A new community-facing division that would operate under Kingston's brand but focus entirely on education, outreach, and equity. A hybrid of nonprofit infrastructure with for-profit backing. It wasn't just an idea. It was a blueprint. Malcolm closed it gently and placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "It's yours." Jordan didn't need applause, he just nodded. A quiet smile forming as he leaned back in the chair beside his father, the weight of the moment settling not on his shoulders, but in his chest. Outside, the street was alive. Children passed by on bikes. A city bus pulled up to the corner stop, its advertisement now bearing Kingston's new campaign, "Where the keys belong to you." The phrase wasn't about metal or machinery, it was about access, ownership, control. Inside, the dealership moved with its own rhythm. Voices, laughter, purpose. Employees helped customers not because they were trained to smile, but because they wanted to. They remembered what it was like to be dismissed, ignored, overlooked, and now they made sure no one felt that way again. Back on the wall in the gallery section hung a new addition, a photo framed in dark walnut. It showed Malcolm and Jordan standing outside the glass doors during the grand opening, side by side, heads slightly bowed in conversation, backs to the camera, the words "Kingston Auto and Culture" overhead, like a banner to the next generation. No plaque was needed. Everyone who walked past the photo understood what it meant. In time, the story of what had happened, of how a man and his son were once turned away and chose to come back not with rage, but with purpose, became something taught in local classrooms, mentioned at city forums, cited in entrepreneurship panels. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. Because it reminded people that sometimes dignity walks quietly, builds patiently, and arrives not with fire, but with foundation. Malcolm eventually stepped down from day-to-day operations. He still came by, still checked in, still sat with young employees who wanted to talk about legacy or growth or how to handle people who underestimated them. But the helm belonged to Jordan now, and Jordan carried it with the same calm strength that had once stood beside him on that fateful day, back when he was just a boy learning what power really looked like. Now he knew. And he wasn't just following his father's footsteps. He was carving his own. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.